Okay, it's the next day after, day 25. I called it on this. Took the anodes and cathodes out. I melted down all the cathodic copper and poured a bar. It's right over here. There's a video coming out about that if it's not already out. Check that out. But now, what am I going to do with this? Well, the video of, the 25-day run of this just came out so far, just came out this morning. It's only been up for a few hours, and already there are a ton of comments. Some of them useful, some of them interesting. About possible improvements for the future, which some of them I'm going to take into account. Things like using, several people have said I should use bags around the anodes, like Dacron bags, to collect the slimes rather than relying on getting them out of the bottom of the tub, which is a really good idea. I will look into that. People have talked about surface area. Maybe I should use sheets for my anodes instead of ingots. That's an idea I had myself. It's just easier to pour ingots, but I will have to look into making some kind of mold where I can pour sheets so I can have more surface area. I'm working on ways to get a better connection between the anodes and cathodes in the power system rather than letting them just ride on these rails in here. I think that will bring the resistance of the cell way down, and we'll get better quality copper, and I could probably run at higher currents too. So lots of ideas for the future. I've also got people telling me, oh, there's probably not enough anode slimes in there to bother with yet. But you know what? I think I'm going to go ahead and process it anyway, just to see how much is in there, because I was surprised in my small-scale experiment just how much gold there was present in it. And I'll put a link to the video with the small-scale experiment in the upper right corner if you haven't seen that. This was a large-scale test. I dissolved, I don't know, maybe a few hundred grams of copper in my small-scale test and got a fair amount of gold. Here we've dissolved like 1.6 kilograms of copper, of my dirty, impure copper, out of my waste bucket. So who knows how much gold and other precious metals are hiding in this tub right now. So what am I going to do with this stuff? Well, I've been thinking about it. I think the very first thing I'm going to do before I stir it up, because all this has had time to settle since yesterday, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to siphon the bulk of the liquid off while it's nice and clear, and just set that liquid aside. I may filter it and reuse it in the future. We'll see. And then once I get the bulk of it off, down to, maybe there's only about a quarter of an inch left or a half an inch left, then I'll start disassembling the cell. I'll take out the internal framework, and wash it all down with distilled water as it comes out. I'll take the bricks out and wash them down with distilled water as they come out. That's going to make the water all turbid, get the anode slimes in the bottom in the water column, so I want to get the bulk of the liquid off first. So that's what I think I'll do. So let me glove up, find a bucket and a hose, and we'll start siphoning this stuff off. Let's get to siphoning. Had a bit of a rainstorm come through. I retreated into the house and had a little lunch, waited it out. And boy, the temperature has dropped precipitously in the meantime. It's gotten chilly. Okay. So I'm going to siphon this liquid out of here into this bucket down here, which I cleaned out. So it's a nice clean bucket. Until I can get this liquid into more permanent containers. And we're siphoning. Now, while I was inside having lunch, I read some more comments on the video I posted this morning, the part 3, at the end of 25 days of running. Lots of good comments, lots of suggestions. There's a lot of ideas that have been suggested several times by different people. Using something non-porous instead of bricks to displace the liquid, yeah. Had that idea too, and other people have. Let's see, better electrical connections to the anodes and cathodes, yes. I would definitely like better electrical connections to the anodes and cathodes. In fact, I have some ideas along those lines, and we may explore them in the future when I put this cell back together and try to run it again. All kinds of ideas for circulating the liquid. Some of them sound pretty good because, you know, you can't have a lot of turbulence in the liquid, or it's going to be, you mix the anode slimes off the bottom into the liquid, which we don't want. I was thinking maybe you put a tap in the side above where the anode slimes settle, and that would make it easy to drain it in the future, so I don't have to siphon it. And also, it could be a tap where I could pull off liquid from the bottom for circulation above the slime layer. So that's a possibility. So yeah, lots of ideas. The thing is, I don't know how much I want to pimp out this cell, because I'm hoping I'm not going to have to run this forever, you know? I have made some improvements to how I work with the stock pot. You know, the reason I have all this copper with precious metals in it was because I wasn't handling the stock pot properly. So right now I have a lot more copper in the stock pot than I used to keep in it, and I have a fish tank bubbler in it to keep the liquid circulating. And before it goes into the waste bucket, any liquid comes into the waste bucket, I'm going to let the stock pot, you know, sit and settle for a week or so, at least, so that I'm not dragging any precious metals over into the waste bucket. So I'm hoping that once I get through all of the dirty copper that I have now that's contaminated with precious metals, it won't be an ongoing problem. So maybe I won't have to run a copper refining cell forever. So if I can just get this thing, you know, good enough to work until I can get through the next set of anodes, and maybe a set or two from my current waste bucket, because I was already working with that waste bucket before I started making my improvements to the stock pot. After that, hopefully I won't be dragging enough precious metals over into the waste bucket to worry about having to refine the copper. That's what I'm hoping. Ugh, okay. You know, not quite 2 gallons of fairly dense copper nitrate solution. Okay, so in here, there's still a little bit of liquid above the slimes layer, and I need to get everything out of here. I need to clean it off. Take the stuff out of here, hose it down a little bit, stuff off of it. Okay. Now you may hear the fume hood droning away in the background. I am processing the material that I ran through my new impact mill, which I just released a video for the other day. I'll put a link to that video in the upper right hand corner if you haven't seen it yet. And if it all interests you, give it a look. It's interesting. There's some blue stuff on these bricks washing off into the liquid. Maybe something that precipitated out in contact with the chemicals in the bricks. I don't know. And here's some red-orange stuff that's not washing off. Well, it is a little bit, I guess. So, interesting. I don't know if that's good or bad. This is distilled water, by the way, that I'm using. Yeah, see? Look at that blue stuff coming right up. I don't know what it is. Got a real witch's brew of chemicals here, I'm sure. Early on, I did put some copper sulfate in with the copper nitrate, trying to adjust the conductivity of the cell. That was probably a mistake. So we've got all kinds of stuff going on in here. Okay, I'm going to finish cleaning off these bricks and then figure out what to do next. Okay, I have tilted the bin over a little bit and propped it up on the bricks. You can see what I'm dealing with here. There's a lot of fine sludge, but there's a lot of big chunks of copper mixed in with it. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to run this stuff through a pretty fine screen and see if I can get the copper out of it. At least the bulk of it. I'm sure there's some small bits of copper in there that are going to go through, and I will probably have to treat this sludge with nitric acid to get rid of the copper. That's going to add to the expenses of this, but this is an experiment. This is not a production facility where I'm trying to maximize my profit. There's also some big black chunks that I'm sure came out of the anodes. Some of them had these little scabby plaques on them. I don't know what those are. So when I screen out the copper, I'm going to have to make sure that include that stuff with the anode slimes. Some's got to get screened out and some's got to be included with it. So this is going to be a job, figuring out how to screen all this stuff. Okay. So I got to get set up to screen this stuff as I dump it out of here. Okay, so what I've got here is a 2-liter beaker and one of my mining sifting screens. This is a 30 mesh, so 30 holes to the inch, fairly fine. And just by pure dumb luck, this fits pretty snugly in the top of the 2-liter beaker. So what I'm proposing to do is just slowly and carefully dump the contents of this bin through this sieve into this beaker. And what I'm hoping will happen is most of the slimes and the liquid will wind up in the beaker, and most of the chunks of copper and other stuff in the bottom of this bin will wind up being caught on the screen. That's what I'm hoping is going to happen. Let me stir this up a little bit, get it good and nasty and turbid, and pour it through. And of course, most of the solids are staying in the bin. This is one of my pieces of insulating hose that I lost. Okay, so let me see if I can convince the stuff in the bin to move. A little bit of water should encourage it. I hope this is showing up on camera. I can't see the viewfinder from here. Let me yeah, it's probably a pretty narrow field. Let me widen it out so you can see maybe a little better exactly what I'm doing. Sorry about that. Fire the photographer. Oh wait, he's me. This actually seems to be working pretty good. I'm catching a lot of stuff on that filter, and it looks a lot like copper. Or on the screen, not the filter. Some anode slimes here, getting all this black nasty stuff out of there, which is the stuff I really want. Alright. This is looking like might have accomplished something here. Love it when a plan comes together, as Hannibal would say. Need to have the A-Team theme song playing in the background. Alright, that was not too shabby. You give this stuff a bit of a rinse. That is looking a lot like it is mostly just copper. There is some black stuff in here, which I will probably have to pick out and put down with the anode slimes. But that is looking seriously like mostly copper. Chunks of copper. And I'm sure some made it into this beaker. There's probably some really fine copper in here. I could do this again. The finest sieve I have is a 40. I'll have to dig it out. I know I got it somewhere. And I could run this stuff through the 40 and see if I catch anything else. But I'll bring the camera over and show you what I caught in here. I really hope that is showing up to some extent. The lighting is not great. In fact, well, let me get my phone out. I'll add to the light a little bit. There you go. You can see that really just looks like mostly copper. There are some black bits, but that just has the look of copper for the most part. So that's good. That's a lot of copper I've screened out of the liquid. I'm not going to have to dissolve that with nitric acid. That would have taken a ton of nitric acid, let me tell you. Okay. Let me set that aside. I don't really see a distinct layer forming on the bottom, which I would expect if a lot of smaller copper came through. But I may filter this with the 40 mesh anyway. Well, I may have to wait for a while though, because all my other 2-liter beakers are in use. Where are they? Let me look around. Okay, in the time it took me to dig up my 40 mesh screen and something to set it on, yeah, a distinct layer has formed. So I think there's some smaller mesh copper in there that I'm going to try and get out. All my 2-liter beakers are busy in the fume hood. This is probably going to make a mess, but I'm going to try to pour this through into this old pitcher. See if I can catch any more finer copper and not have to deal with dissolving it. Yeah, see, there's a big layer of something there. Kind of acting like metal. Not quite as dense as gold, but still acting metallic. Yes, I definitely got some more chunks of copper. Okay. There's a lot of other stuff in here too. I'm trying to wash it away. But yeah, there's definitely some more chunks of copper. I'm about out of distilled water. Let me refill. Alright, I can actually see a little bit of copper floating in this stuff, so I'm going to have to dissolve some copper. But let me see if I can reduce it. This sieve is a better fit on top of this 2-liter beaker, so let me see if I can encourage some more of this stuff to go through. Oh yeah. Lots of chunks of copper in here that went through the 30 but won't quite make it through the 40. I wish I had an even finer sieve, but I don't. It might be a good investment in the future if I'm going to do this. I don't know how well that's showing up, but there's some copper in there too. Okay. So, I guess this is the stuff I'm going to have to deal with. Right here. Get it all. Yeah, there is some serious slimy looking stuff in here, let me tell you. They don't call it anode slimes for nothing. It's difficult to deal with. So I think what I'm going to do is some on the outside here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit and wait until it settles, and then get rid of the bulk. Get rid of the bulk of the liquid, maybe siphon it off, and probably I'm thinking run the rest of the liquid and whatever solids are left, catch them on a filter, vacuum filter it, just to get all the dry solids. And then move on from there. So I'm just going to let this sit and settle. All my other glassware is in use. I got to finish up the projects I got going on in the fume hood before I can do anything with this, so maybe a couple days anyway. I'll just let it sit and settle. So I don't know how well that's showing up on camera, but I used a piece of paper towel to wipe out the inside of this pitcher and the inside of the tub, and that debris, the residue on the paper towel is quite purple. So I'm thinking there could be some gold there, there could be some other precious metals. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this with my paper storage with all my used filters and stuff, and process this with my used filters just in case. Okay, so while I'm waiting for this to settle and some glassware to become free, let me pick through this and get the black bits out and throw them in with the stuff in the beaker for processing. There's some big chunks of copper in here. Glad I filtered them out. That's some black stuff there. There's some black stuff. Where'd it go? There it is. Get the copper off of it. So I got a feeling these chunks of black stuff like this are just the sort of thing I want to process. That is weird how those were inside the anodes. Just the sort of stuff I'm wanting to process. And I'll set this copper aside. I'm sure it's probably not clean enough to be called cathodic copper by any stretch of the imagination, so maybe this will get used to make more anodes in the future. That's what I'm thinking, more anodes in the future. Alright, I think I got the big chunks out of it. I'm not going to worry about any little chunks. So, just gonna let it settle and wait for glassware to become available, then do some further processing. I have all my brilliant ideas too late. I got to thinking that the bits of black stuff I was pulling out of here, you know what they probably are? They're probably bits of slag that got incorporated in those dirty ingots, those dirty anode ingots I poured. Because that was some really dirty copper. There was a lot of slag floating on top. I'll bet there was a lot of slag that got incorporated in them. And those bits are probably just like glassy black slag. Oh well. I don't think they'll hurt anything by putting them in with the anode slimes. They probably just won't amount to anything when I process them. That's what I'm thinking. We'll see. Alright guys, it's been a few days. I've got my other projects just about done in the fume hood, so I've got some glassware free, got some hot plate space free. This has had time to settle. It's been, like I said, 2 days. This has settled nice. There's a thick layer of slimes in the bottom and a lot of clear liquid above it. So, my plan going forward is I'm going to siphon off the bulk of this liquid and leave behind the slimes, and then we'll start working on treating the slimes. So, okay, I'm going to get set up for siphoning, but first, before I do that, I wanted to address some things that came up in the comments on the last couple of videos. And really, I appreciate the great comments that have been coming out on these videos, guys. Just amazing stuff. You've been very helpful, very insightful. Lots of good ideas for improving the cell. Lots of good ideas for what could be going on inside the cell. In fact, I specifically want to address something a fellow called, and I hope I'm not butchering your name here, I'm sorry if I am, Johannes de Sloper, has made several really good comments. And he addressed the idea of why I got more copper out of the cell than I put in. Now, my original idea was that my electrolyte was so concentrated in copper nitrate that I was just plating copper out of the electrolyte. Well, I got to thinking about that even before he commented and realized that probably was not going to be the answer, because the only way that would work, it would be I'd be producing free nitric acid in the electrolyte. Well, free nitric acid and copper, that's not compatible. The nitric acid would just dissolve the copper again. So that's not the answer. I was wrong there. I could not come up with a mechanism for plating the copper out of the electrolyte. Okay? And he chimed in and said, no, that's not going to happen either. So he's right about that, I think. His theory about what happened involves 3 points. Number one, I'm not plating copper out of the electrolyte. Okay, I think he's right about that. Number two, another metal is going into solution out of the dirty, contaminated copper anodes and pushing the copper out of the electrolyte. Okay, now that makes sense, because there's a lot of contaminants in those copper anodes. So, yeah, I can see another metal going into solution and pushing copper out on the anode, on the cathodes. Okay. And his third point was that other metal is probably silver. Well, I almost completely discounted his theories because of that, because I knew it couldn't be silver for a couple reasons. Mainly, if it was silver that was getting pushed out of the anodes into the electrolyte and then pushing copper out of the electrolyte onto the cathodes, silver is more dense than copper, quite a bit more dense than copper. So if we were losing silver from the anodes and plating extra copper onto the cathodes, I would wind up with cathodes that were lighter than the anodes started out to be, not the other way around. So, yeah. And then there's another thing. I can test to see whether there's any silver. This is the used electrolyte from the cell. Some of it. I've actually got, you know, like a jug and a half of it here. But this is tap water. So I just put some tap water in here. Now, I did not believe there was much silver contamination in the anodes, because most of that silver would have come out as silver chloride in my stock pot in my waste bucket. It would not have been metallic silver to be incorporated in the anodes when I melted them. And sure enough, you know, there's chlorine in the tap water. It's a little bit blue, but it's crystal clear. There's no cloud of silver chloride in there. So we don't have silver contamination. So Johannes, I think you are 2/3 correct. I think, yes, I'm not plating copper out of my electrolyte. And number two, some other metal is going into solution to push the copper out. Actually, I'm thinking metals, plural. I know that there's iron contamination in those anodes, and I know that there's zinc contamination in them. And I think what I got was, I got iron and zinc going into solution, pushing copper out. Now, that would also explain the heavy red staining I saw on the bricks in the cell that I was using to displace the liquid upwards. There was a lot of rust on those bricks. I was wondering, well, was this leached out of the bricks? There was a lot of rust there. I don't think that was leached out of the bricks. I think that rust probably came from the iron from the anodes, and it probably just oxidized in the cell and plated out on those bricks. So I think it's iron and zinc. Yeah, so I'll give you 2/3 credit, Johannes. Not bad. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, as Meatloaf would say. So thanks for that insight. Okay, so let me get set up for siphoning, and I got to replace the camera battery because it's getting low. Okay, let's get to siphoning this liquid here. Don't want to stir it up and get those anode slimes, you know, back in the water column. Don't want to make it turbid. Careful here. So I'll probably be conservative with my siphoning too, because I suspect a lot of those anode slimes are pretty light. If I get too much suction down too close, I'll probably start sucking them up. So I may leave a little bit more of this blue fluid in here than I really want to. Anyway, I will speed this segment up. Okay, I think that's as much as I dare take off. Oh, that is some nice clear liquid I've got there. I think I will just add that right back into my electrolyte storage for use next time. Yeah. Then we'll deal with that. Okay, let's see if I can get this in here without making a mess of it. Now this is going to be a little weaker than the electrolyte was originally because there's a little bit of rinse water here, but I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that the actual concentration of the electrolyte isn't as important as just preventing stratification. Okay. There we are. Put this away till next time. Okay, here we are. Got my precious anode slimes. My precious. So what am I going to do with them now that I've got them? Well, I think the first thing I need to do is treat this with some nitric acid. Because I know there's got to be some copper in there. Some really fine copper that made it through all of my sieves and is mixed in with the anode slimes. There may be other metallic bits in there. Let me treat this with nitric acid and see what I can pull out of it. Any gold that's in there isn't going anywhere. Any other, like platinum group metals that are in there, I don't think are going anywhere with a nitric acid treatment. And let me pull out as much of the metals that I can pull out with nitric acid as I can, and then we'll filter this and then hit it with some aqua regia and see what we can get out of what's left. So let me get this in the fume hood and we'll get some nitric acid on it. I'll dilute this with some fresh distilled water and hit it with some nitric acid. Alright, I've got a little bit of room in my fume hood this morning for this, so got it on one of my hot plates. I'm actually recovering the last bit of gold that was produced in the impact grinder video. This is the second batch. I got a fair amount out of the first batch. This is the second batch. It looks just as good. Loving that new impact grinder. Check out that video. I'm actually going to be coming out with another video because I'm making further improvements to it. Works great. Think there's room for improvement. Another little project I got going on back here is an ongoing project for trying to get a cheaper source of nitric acid. Trying to recover nitric acid from my wastes. That's sort of a back burner video, a back burner project. If I can get it working, I'll make a video on it. I'm finding that I can mine my own waste products for valuable stuff. That's great. So, okay, on to the problem at hand. Let's get some distilled water on this. Let's see, a little bit more maybe. And let me use some distilled water to try and get some of this crud off the sides of the beaker and down into the bottom where it can react. Well, some of it's pretty tenacious. Oh, nitric acid fumes may take it off. Okay. In goes some concentrated nitric acid, 70%. Okay, we'll be a little bit scientific about it. I was just going to eyeball it. But I think we'll measure how much nitric acid we put in there, okay? There's a little over 2 milliliters. 4, 6. Alright, there's roughly 8 milliliters of nitric acid. we'll see what happens with that. I'm going to put a little heat to it, see what kind of reaction we can get going. And see how much acid it's going to take to dissolve away all of the base metals in there, at least make it look like all of the base metals are dissolved. I'm not really good at getting rid of all of them. My aqua regia generally turns green, but hey, I'm used to that. I don't care what color the aqua regia is, as long as there's gold coming out of it. So we'll just let that cook and see what happens. Alright, this has been on the heat for 10-15 minutes now. It's warmed up quite nicely. And you know what? There's absolutely nothing happening. That is not the result I was expecting. I was expecting anything from a violent boil over to just gentle bubbling and fuming. But nothing was not on my list of possibilities. Okay. Interesting. I'm just going to let it cook for a while, and we'll see if we get any kind of reaction. Maybe I'll turn the heat up some, bring it up close to boiling, see if I can get any kind of reaction going. Because I'm really pretty certain there's some elemental copper in there that made it through my sieves. So I want to get that out of solution, along with any other free metals that might be in there, aside from, of course, you know, the gold and the platinum group metals. So I'll just bump the heat up a little bit and let it cook, and we'll see if we get any kind of reaction. Alright, it has been about another 15 or 20 minutes. This is on higher heat. I've seen some really minor bubbling in there, but no real fume production or anything. Now, I don't know if that's showing up on the video, but it really looks like there's copper floating on the surface in there. Now, I suppose it could be floating if it's covered with gas bubbles because it's reacting with the nitric acid I put in there. I don't know. But really, there's very little reaction going on. I'm wondering, does all that nitric acid I put in there get used up? I don't know. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a little bit more in, just see what happens. A few more milliliters. This is hot now, so I got to... Oh yeah. Look at that. That produced a reaction. Interesting. Where'd those 8 milliliters of nitric acid I put in initially go? So that's about 6 more. I'll put in another 8 and stop there for now and see what happens. Yeah, because that's definitely producing a reaction. Although it seems to die out pretty darn quick. Give it a stir. Huh. Well, never done this before, at least not on this scale, so this is all new to me. We'll see what happens. Really, there's not much in the way of fume production. Haven't even had to turn the fume hood on. Haven't produced anything in here but steam yet today. See, it looks like as it settles down, there's more copper coming up floating to the surface. But I think I'm going to let it sit. I mean, it's got 16 milliliters of nitric acid in there now. I think I'm just going to let it sit, and we'll see what happens in another 15 or 20 minutes. Alright, it's been another 10 or 15 minutes, and there's a little bit of bubbling going on. It's hard to tell how much of it's boiling and how much of it's any kind of reaction. Still don't see any kind of fumes in there. So, I don't know. A lot of nitric acid in there, though, so I think I'm just going to let it sit for now and see what happens. Okay, it has been a while longer, and there seems to be absolutely nothing happening in here. Now, there is enough nitric acid in there, like, how much did I put in? Like 16 milliliters. That if there was any kind of free metal in there, there should be all kinds of fizzing, there should be all kinds of fume production. There's a lot of nitric acid in there. So the fact that there's nothing happening, even though we're on pretty high heat, tells me there's no free metal in there. Okay. I guess I was wrong about that, or maybe there was just a little bit that went away without drama. I don't know. Remember, I'm making this up as I go along. Never done this before. Don't know what the heck I'm doing. We're figuring it out together. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off the heat. Since there's really nothing going on, there's really no point in continuing. Not going to add any more acid. I'm going to let this cool down and filter it and get all the solids out, and then we'll go on from there. Probably put the solids in Aqua Regia, I'm thinking, but I need to let it cool off first because you don't want to filter hot liquids because the heat makes the filters fall apart. So let it cool down, then we'll filter it.